Okay, so I thought to make some comments about applying Dharma to current events, and my motivation in doing so is not to influence people's political opinions, but to show you how what we're learning in the Dharma is applicable to the rest of our life, and how to help us see things in the world in a Dharma way. Okay, so with the protests that have been going on in Egypt now for over a week, I've been hoping every day to be able to come in and tell you that Mubarak has resigned, but he hasn't. Yesterday, the military did say that it wouldn't fire on the protesters, which was really good news. But then one never knows, if push comes to shove, what's going to happen, because it seems like the only way that Mubarak can retain his position at this point is for a very severe crackdown to occur. And in China in 1989, there was friendliness between the troops and the protesters before the very bloody crackdown happened. So in our prayers, I think we want to pray that nobody suffers and that there's no violence now, no matter which side of the conflict it's on. We want safety for everybody. And also that nobody creates negative karma through harming others that will make them experience very unfortunate rebirths or a lot of suffering in the future. Okay, so to pray for people's present as well as future well-being, and that somehow all these people can, come to know the teachings and attain enlightenment. Another way to look at it is, we really appreciate our freedom in this country. We take it so much for granted. I realized how ignorant I was of what the Egyptians have been living through, simply because, well, Egypt's our ally, so, and they're, working for peace in the Middle East, so the government must be okay to their own people. Well, it wasn't, and to really appreciate the freedom that we have here, especially our religious freedom, to be able to practice the Dharma as we wish, and to be able to speak as we wish, and to be able to congregate as we wish. I don't know that it's what the state was in Egypt, but I know in the communist countries, extremely difficult for Buddhists to be able to meet and practice. So we want to really appreciate that condition that we have, and hope that others can have it as well. Another thing that it brings up is our government's position on all this. And our government, the official voice of our government has been very quiet. In the early days, Obama urged restraint and urged reform. But, our government, which is supposedly for democracy and freedom, here when the Egyptians are asking for that, we aren't supporting them. We're supporting the dictatorial government. So you can understand the difficulty, on one side. Oh, I must say, Senator John Kerry wrote a beautiful op-ed article in the New York Times saying that we should support the protesters. And he was very skillful in how he did it. He expressed it in a way that Mubarak wasn't going to lose face. It was very, very nicely done. In any case, you can see the quandary, because on one hand, yes, we want to support freedom. I'm talking now from the governmental point of view. My personal point of view is something else. On one hand, want to support freedom and democracy. On the other hand, kind of what's going to happen to our ally in the Middle East and our commercial interests and our oil interests and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and, blah, blah. Okay? And so, the government wants to come out on the side of whoever is going to triumph, but we don't know who that is yet. So they don't want to come out against Mubarak because he may win in the end and because it may jeopardize our relationship with other autocratic leaders in the Middle East, of which we are friends with quite a number. On the other hand, there's concern that, there is no organization, there are no oppositional leaders aside from the Muslim Brotherhood with which you could create a real democracy and governmental structure where you have multiple parties and, elections with multiple candidates and all. So there's concern about, well, who would get elected if you had democracy? So you can understand those kinds of things. And it was making me think that also in Buddhist circles, you see where there's this kind of dilemma between immediate benefit and one's principles. Okay, so to give you a few examples, there's one Dharma center that I know of that it was in a city where a very controversial teacher would also come from time to teach. And the leader of the Dharma Center thought, if this controversial teacher comes and just teaches anywhere because he's very charismatic, he will gain a lot of popularity and people will follow him to the disadvantage of our Dharma Center, and it may harm those people, to follow him. So it's better that we sponsor his teachings because then we can control what he does, and we can do kind of, patch-up work afterwards. So they would sponsor his teachings with that kind of reason. Okay? So you can again see that there's some dilemma. Well, better to have him under our control than just as a free agent. But then also, it brings credibility to this person. I also knew of a situation in which a Tibetan Lama was very friendly, again, with a very controversial group. Because that controversial group made large donations to his monastery. And so, again, it was like, well, that person supports us, and by supporting us, then we can educate our monks, and we're spreading the Dharma, so it's not so important that he's so controversial. On the other hand, I told the Lama, I said, you're giving that person some credibility by supporting them. So it's like the U.S. government giving Mubarak credibility. That same kind of thing. So you can see the dilemma that people are in because they want some advantage now, but it actually brings about some ethical dilemma, by going according to that. So there's all these sorts of things that come up. And I think it's helpful for us to think about, in viewing other people's situation, kind of, what would we do if when we face that kind of dilemma? Do you go for the practical aspects of what will benefit now? Do you go for living according to the principles, even though that may bring suffering later on, but you're not sure? But doing the practical things now may bring suffering also. Okay? Yeah? So I think it's helpful to see things like this and then think for ourselves of situations that we could encounter and try and gain some clarity before we get in those kinds of situations. And so what are we, what is most important to us? What are we willing to risk? And I think also in this kind of situation, and in many situations, to not get a very narrow mind of either this or that. You know, because I think that's what makes a lot of these things very difficult, is either this or that. And to, as much as possible, in any difficult situations we face, to think of multiple options, to really train our mind to see many, many, many options, you know, and how to combine good qualities from different options that may make its own option. Yeah. Instead of just becoming like this. Yeah. Okay, so that's my 2 cents about current events and, you know, how to look at it with a Dharma viewpoint.
Short-term benefit, long-term suffering, short-term
yes.
suffering, long-term suffering.
Options
that
right.
situation can bring.
Right. Right. And yeah, so you know, we always want to look for the long-term benefit, even if it means short-term suffering. But sometimes we're not clear if a certain decision, to what extent it will bring long-term benefit or harm. And then there's long-term benefit and harm in terms of this life and in terms of karma, which are also different.